Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to give a review of Dan Doriani's commentary on the Gospel of Matthew from the Reformed Expository Commentary set. So this is actually, I'm holding up volume one. This is actually a 2-volume set. I have them electronically, which is how I was using them recently as I was preaching through the Gospel of Matthew. So I'm going to give a review of the full 2-volume set. So if you've been watching my channel at all, you may know that I finished preaching through the Gospel of Matthew recently, and so I did a few review videos of some of the resources that I used for that. I could not lay my hands on this book, though. I was trying to find it so I could give my review on it. Finally, I had the chance to kind of reorganize my study a little bit yesterday and found out there's a floor in this room and everything. It's not all covered in books, so that's exciting. And came across this volume, so I thought, let me do a quick review video on this book, because it is one of the books that I made sure to read every single time, or almost every single time I was preparing a sermon preaching through the Gospel of Matthew. So as I mentioned, it's part of the Reformed Expository Commentary set. They have volumes covering, I think it's finished now. They have covered, I think, all 66 books of the Bible. There's also a standalone volume called Incarnation in the Gospels, which is sort of Christmas sermons as well. So it's a interesting commentary set. A lot of popular Reformed preachers or seminary professors who have contributed to this. This is very much, I would say, a sort of homiletical commentary. In other words, what you're getting in this commentary is not a sort of deep dive into the minutia of the Greek or the or the biblical context or whatever. What you're getting in essence are the sermons that each contributor preached on this set. So this is really, these 2 volumes are Dan Doriani's sermons from when he preached through the Gospel of Matthew. Volume 1 covers chapters 1 through 13. Volume 2 covers 14 through the end of the book. So you're getting another person's sermons on this text. And that has certain advantages and it has certain disadvantages. So the advantages, first off, are, well, let me go through the disadvantages so I can end on a positive note. The disadvantages are, of course, that if you are, coming at it and you're going, okay, I've got a text about what does this word mean, or I got a question about what does this word mean, or I'm trying to understand more about the background, you're not always going to get an answer to that in these volumes. This is these thoughts are kind of true of all the books in this series and series like it, because it's not alone. There are many commentary series that are structured more this way, where you're getting sort of a written record of people's sermons. Anytime you have that, one of the downsides is it's not going to give you necessarily a line by line, verse by verse commentary on every detail of the text, and it's only as strong as the sermon is itself. So there are times, and I've definitely found some volumes in this set I didn't love, and were of less value. And so you've just got to kind of weigh that versus a more critical commentary that's doing something very different. However, there are some definite advantages to this. So you are getting someone's sermons, but you're also getting the sermons of someone who, in Dan Doriani's case, for example, is a scholar as well. And so he is modeling for you, how do you bring that scholarly training in his field. I believe his training is in New Testament and theology, and so it's how do you bring that background to the foreground when you're actually preaching to a congregation. So one of the helpful things is, once you have worked through the text yourself, once you have looked at those more critical commentaries, if you're at that stage homiletically as a preacher saying, how do I pull this together into a sermon, you get the chance to sort of see how someone else has done that. Now, one of the cautions, of course, is you want to make sure as a preacher, and I'm saying this as a younger preacher to maybe younger preachers, you don't start by reading this, because what will happen, or what could happen, is that you'll hear how someone else kind of pulled it together, you'll hear how someone else outlined it, and you'll kind of become attached to that model, and you won't really have owned the text yourself. You always want to first start with your own work in the English Bible and then the original languages as much as you can. Go as far as you can that way. Develop your outline. If you are a manuscript guy, work on your manuscript. And then as you come across questions about the text, go to those critical commentaries to get those answered. And then as you're at that point of really finalizing your outline, or maybe you're kind of stuck, you go, okay, I feel like I understand what this text is saying, but I'm struggling to know how to communicate it. Well, that's where something like this can become very valuable, because you'll get to see how a scholar, pastor, has processed through the same text you're wrestling with, processed through the same information you're wrestling with, but you're getting to see how he organizes it, how he illustrates it, how he applies it, and that's very, very helpful. So, one way of thinking about it is like this, both you as a preacher and, him as a preacher are dealing with the same ingredients in the cabinet, but you get the chance to see what dish he's preparing with those same ingredients. Now, it's important for you to sort of spend some time with those things before you jump to his dish, or you'll think this is the only way it can look, and you'll be tempted to copy what someone else is doing, which is never, first off, if you're presenting it as your own, it's dishonest, it's plagiarism. But even if you're just, leaning heavily on someone you're giving credit, it doesn't have the freshness of something that's really arisen from your own wrestling with the text. So as preachers, we always want to do that hard work of wrestling with the text ourselves. But if you've done that, this volume in this set, or these two volumes, I should say, Dan Doriani's commentaries on Matthew, were very helpful for me when I got to that homiletical stage. If I was wanting to just sort of say, okay, I've thought through how I want to present this, but let me listen to how someone else has preached this. And his sermons are very good, and they actually do a good job of bringing together those two worlds of the professor and the preacher, and sort of how do you connect the riches of the one to the context of the other. Because there are some guys who are very good preachers, but you'll be amazed with their oratory, but you're not necessarily going to be as helped in your just understanding of the text, And you got other guys who are master linguists, and they know the cultural context, and they know the intertestamental connections, but preaching that with fire to a congregation is not something that they're very gifted in doing. Dan Doriani has a healthy dose of both of those things, at least in these two volumes. And so I found it to be a very useful set. Again, I have the whole set of these Reformed Expository commentaries on electronically. I use Accordance as my Bible software, so I access them there. And I found some volumes to be not very helpful, some very helpful. And I would put Doriani's contribution in that second category. It's been a very helpful book. I've enjoyed it, and it's been very useful for me as I'm preaching through the Gospel of Matthew. So it's helpful for preachers if you use it in the way that I mentioned. But one of the advantages of this series is because it really is just a collection of solid sermons on a book of the Bible, going through in an expository, verse-by-verse way. If you're a layperson who has no plans to teach or preach through the Gospel of Matthew, you could still get a hold of this. You could still read through it, and you'd be very helped by it, because it would be like getting to work through in print a sermon series on the Gospel of Matthew. So that does give this a broader appeal and broader usefulness. So if you are looking for something, maybe you're going through Matthew in your devotions and you want something to read along with that, Doriani's volumes would be very useful. If you're a preacher who's going to be working your way through the Gospel of Matthew, this would be one of the kind of top books I would recommend to fill that homiletical commentary spot. So again, you would need other commentaries too. I found Calvin very helpful as a more kind of critical commentary, just understanding the text. Linsky is very helpful. There's a number of those kinds of things that are very, very useful. Knox Chamberlain has one in the Mentor Commentary series. So there's things like that out there. But then when you're trying to think about how to pull the pieces together, something like Doriani is very useful. So I would highly recommend these two volumes, Commentary on Matthew and the Reformed Expository Commentary series by Daniel Doriani.